Hey viewers, my name is Kara, and in this video I am shamelessly stealing an idea from Katey Flowers and her audience, who suggested that she do it in the first place. It's called Shop My Shelf, and it involves looking at all of the books that you already currently own and picking up the things that you really want to read. So kind of like your top next things I want to read that I already own. So this is perfect for me because I actually, at the end of last year and then this calendar year, started trying to make it a point to really finally try to read some of the many books that I own that I haven't read yet. So last year I went through all of my books that are actually mine, so not my partner's books because we combined our libraries, but I looked through and found any of the books that I know are mine, that I owned, that I hadn't read yet, and I put them in a pile and I took a picture of them, and I meant to post it on Instagram as kind of a reference and tell people like, hey, these are a bunch of the books that I have that I haven't read yet, what should I read next? But I didn't end up posting it yet because I keep finding a book to read next myself. Or, as was the recent case, I just found, you can actually see them behind me here in the frame, I just found the Circle of Magic Quartet by Tamora at my local thrift store. So they were a new acquisition, but I read them first, and then I went into reading the first thing on my shelf that I hadn't read that I was like, I'm gonna read this. So I just read it. It was very short, so I'm gonna share that with you. And then I have a couple of things that I'm currently rereading, and then I wanted to pick out no more than 5 new books, like books on my shelf that I have never read before, to talk about, that are kind of like my top 5 new books off my shelves that I want to read sometime soon. And I don't know if that'll be even this year or if it'll be next year, because there are some brand new books that I want to find, acquire, purchase for myself, that I will probably use the gift card that my mom gave me for winter solstice, because she's very clear about the fact that I'm not supposed to use my winter solstice gift card for paying bills, which is very tempting, but that I should actually use it for something that I want. So I'm just gonna buy books about witchcraft. So yeah, but anyway, so the most recent things that I read that are something that I had been meaning to read for a long time but I didn't own yet was the Circle of Magic Quartet. People have asked me over the past years on YouTube if I had ever read it, and I had not. So I found them, I bought them. They were very inexpensive because they're Scholastic books. This printing was from Scholastic Books, and at this particular thrift store, the Scholastic books are even cheaper than any of the other books. So it looks really thick, but that's because each volume is 2 books in one. So volume 1 has Water and Fire, yeah, Water and Fire, and then volume 2 is Earth and Air. So that's 4 books, and they're like, I don't even think they're really young adult fiction. I think they're considered juvenile fiction, like even younger. So they were very quick reads. I read those super quick. I did post about those on Instagram. The next thing I grabbed immediately after finishing those, I also, Katey mentioned this, that they're trying to do this more and maybe didn't do it so much last year. Something that I have always liked to do is try to switch between, or have one of each going at the same time, fiction and nonfiction. So obviously I read a lot of nonfiction that has to do with witchcraft and pagan spirituality. That's pretty much all the nonfiction I read these days, unless I'm reading like bibliographies or memoirs or something like that from people that I really like, such as YouTubers who have written books. I love Tyler Oakley's book, Binge, Hannah Hart's book, the title of which I cannot remember right now. Yeah, cool. Anyway, and other than that, the fiction that I read also tends to be, obviously, like Circle of Magic, about magic and about witches or mages in that case. You have people who do magic, kids entering magical worlds or finding out that they had powers that nobody knew about before, right? So I read a lot of that stuff, but this is what I'm about to talk to you about is absolutely no different than that. So here we go. The next thing I picked up after reading Circle of Magic that I have owned for several years and had not read yet. It's a super short book, whoop, super teeny, and I picked it up for some reason thinking it was going to take me longer than it did, and it only took me about 2 hours to read this. It's about the length of a play, and it is The Perfection of Yoga. I talked about this briefly in my Pagan Perspective video, not from this past week, but the previous week, on orthodoxy and orthopraxy. But there was an issue with my video. It does not show up publicly on the channel because I had to edit some of it out. So I used the YouTube Studio editor because I don't have my usual editing software, which is why all of my videos are really long and unedited, one takes. But rather than redo the video for the 6th time that day, I said, you know, I'm just going to use the YouTube Studio editor to cut out a little bit. But then it took more than 24 hours to process the changes to it. So by then, if I had made it public, it would have made it out of order on the channel, and it would have shown up like the Tuesday video came after the Wednesday video, and I didn't want to mess up the daily order on the channel. So for now, it is unlisted. I linked it in my video from this week, and I also posted the link to it on my CuteWitch772 Facebook page, on my Patreon page, CuteWitch772, and I shared it from my Facebook to the Pagan Perspective Facebook page. So there are links to it everywhere. You can check it out, but I talked about this book briefly in my video on orthodoxy and orthopraxy because there's a section in here that talks about theoretical knowledge of yoga and practical knowledge of, like, the actual principles behind the spirituality of yoga. Like, of course, yoga is not just the poses. That's a big misconception by a lot of people. So that's one of the reasons that I really wanted to read this. It's very quick. There's like 8 chapters or something, super quick. And this version of it that I have at least has some color photos in the front. So that's pretty nifty. Yeah. So I read it super quickly. So that is the first thing really in my effort to start reading the books that I own that I haven't read. So this is perfect timing that Katey did this video, and I didn't know what video I was going to do this weekend. So I was like, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to steal this idea from you. So here we are. Now, the next thing that I picked up to reread is the only book that I own, and I read it years ago, probably like 2010 or something like that. It's the only book that I own by DJ Conway, and I started feeling like I wanted to reread it early in February. And then I want to say like February 3rd or 4th, I started thinking about rereading it. So I got it off the shelf and I set it next to the bed so I could start reading it before bed. And then on February 6th is when I saw Selena Fox's post notifying us that DJ Conway had passed away on February 1st. So I just thought, wow, that's really timely that I just started thinking about rereading this book around the same time. And I didn't know yet that DJ had passed away. So I decided to definitely start rereading this. I just started rereading it a couple nights ago. I read before bed because I'm still suffering from insomnia. It's been 3 months now, and according to the internet, which I know is definitely medical advice, sound advice. No, obviously it's not. I'm kidding. That's sarcasm for those of you who can't hear it. I try to help you out. But anyway, yeah, supposedly after 3 months is when it's chronic. So, I mean, whatever, take it with a grain of salt, but I can't sleep, so I've been reading before bed, and I started rereading By Oak, Ash, and Thorn, Modern Celtic Shamanism by DJ Conway. So, this is definitely not her only book. There's a lot of books that she's read. Two of the other ones that I do not own that I want to read by her are Maiden Mother Crone and Moon Magic, specifically. And there's a lot of others. There's a little other books by this author list in the front. But those are two that I have kind of been meaning to read for a few years and just never found, because I usually get all of my books at secondhand shops, thrift shops, things like that. Pretty much the only time I buy a book is when it's a new book and I know it's not going to be found secondhand or anything like that, or if it's someone that I know and I want to support by buying it directly from the publisher or whatever. So I did that with Thorne Mooney's book, Traditional Wicca, when it came out last year, for example. But other than that, I get most of my books secondhand or like from library book sales when libraries are getting rid of books. So you'll see some of those come up later. The other thing that I am rereading right now, and I say rereading with quotations because if I were rereading them, I'd be done reading them by now. Instead, I am keeping it by my bed, and every so often when it's bedtime and I'm obviously not tired because insomnia, but if my partner is also not really tired, then I read a chapter of it at a time to my partner and the cat, you know. So, but otherwise I'd be done rereading these by now, and I am looking forward to rereading them entirely. But the first one right now is the one I'm on, and this is the Fairyland series by Catherine M. Valente. The first book is The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making. These are considered juvenile fiction. That's where I found them in my local libraries anyway. It is super sophisticated and wonderful and detailed, magical world, and so if you haven't heard of these, definitely read them. I love them. I read them just a few years ago, and I learned about them through S.J. Tucker's music, because S.J. Tucker has an album inspired by the first book of Fairyland. The album is called Wonders, and so that's how I heard about it, and I checked them out at the library. My partner got me these for keeps for winter solstice this past year. Otherwise, I read them through the library system. I now own the first three. There are actually 5 books. I read the 4th one through the library, but I don't own it. And I haven't even read the 5th one because my local library system didn't have it. So that's the one I have yet to read. But that's the first one. The second one is The Girl Who Soared Over Fairyland and Cut the Moon in Two. And the third is The Girl Who Fell Beneath Fairyland and Led the Revels There. I don't know if it says the names of the other two, but you can find it online. It's the Fairyland novels, or the Fairyland series by Catherine M. Valente. Catherine is spelled like that. Boom. So you can look that up. So those are the things that I'm rereading. Autofocus. Okay. Those are the things that I'm rereading right now. And then I wanted to pick no more than 5 new books off my shelves, and I only ended up picking 4. There could have been 5 because there's one more that kind of goes with 3 of these have a very similar sort of theme to them, and there's a 4th one that would also go along with that theme, but I'm not actually as concerned about reading that one soon. I don't know. Like, I guess I'm excited to read it, but it's similar to 3 of these other ones. And then the one is different. So, starting with the one that's different, I want to make a disclaimer here. The only reason I owned this book is because one of the libraries locally was getting rid of it, and it's about Wicca. And my partner picked it up so that they could start reading it. And so they've been reading it, and that's why we have it in our house. But my partner stopped reading it because it begins by telling you a lot of stuff that you shouldn't pay attention to, essentially. I don't really know how else to describe that, so I'm just going to show it to you and then tell you. That'll make a little bit more sense, I think. So I had never heard of this author before. I've never heard of this book. It appears to be because the author is not a pagan. They are a scholar of contemporary pagan studies, an archaeologist, and a PhD researcher. And they wrote this sort of academic research text about Wicca. It is Wicca, History, Belief, and Community in Modern Pagan Witchcraft by Ethan Doyle White. Never heard of this. I looked through it briefly before doing this video because I started to realize, like, I don't like recommending books or even mentioning books on my channel if I have no idea what they're about, especially if they're about Wicca or paganism, because I don't know if I'm mentioning a title that's, like, horrible, and then you guys are all gonna go check it out, and then here I have brought a horrible book to your attention. So that's the only reason that I know, like, this is an academic text. It's not like Oak, Ash, and Thorn. It's not like Wicca by Scott Cunningham. It's not a Wiccan talking about Wicca. It's a pagan scholar academically researching and reporting on kind of how Wicca developed and different stuff about it. It is very dense. So this is something definitely that, like, it covers a lot of ground. And so this is where the part comes in where my partner stopped reading it because they got stuck in this section where it just spends a whole chapter talking about Gardner's early rivals. And in this section, it basically, like, tells you some names of people that had a tangential part in Wicca's history or Wicca's perception throughout history as it was beginning. And then it pretty much, like, tears them apart and tells you why this person has been discredited and this person, you know, shouldn't be paid attention to and stuff like that. So my partner said they kind of got sick of reading, like, here's this person's name and here's what they had to do with Wicca and they were wrong and they, you know, they claimed this and they purported that and they blah blah blah, but they suck, basically. Like, so I was like, yeah, that sounds interesting. But now, like, looking at it in context of the book, I know why it's there, but I can also see why it's really tough to get through if that's the beginning of the book. The second part of the book gets into the research about actual beliefs and praxes. And so, again, orthodoxy and orthopraxy coming together. Yeah, actual beliefs. And then it has a section in here about converting to the craft, which is a phrase that a lot of us don't like to use because we feel like conversion is not an appropriate term for how many of us realized our connections to this path. So that's really interesting. I, like, briefly looked through that. Maybe that's a subject for another video in the future. I don't know if we've actually done that before on Pagan Perspective or on my channel. It's a topic that has come up many times, but I don't know if I've ever done a single video devoted to it. There's a section on material culture and Wicca on the web. So yeah, I am actually pretty interested to see what is in here. Also because since it is an academic text, at the end, it talks about criticisms. And so if you've ever read, like, scientific research papers for any reason in courses that you've taken or anything like that, you know that there's a section where it'll bring up, like, here are the well-known roadblocks to this type of thing, and here's how we have tried to get past them, or here are the popular criticisms and reasons why this study might not be perfect because, you know, we only studied 2,000 people in this region of the world, and so we know that it cannot apply to the entire world or anything like that, you know? There's those kind of disclaimers about roadblocks to getting really full pictures from individual research. So it mentions in here, like, one of the criticisms is that a lot of people doing academic study of paganism and witchcraft are not pagans and witches, but at the same time, some people think that that's a good thing because it prevents the bias of like people who are part of these paths who just want to talk it up and say that everything's good and positive, and they might ignore some of the bad stuff about it. So they think that people who are not part of the religions themselves have a more objective viewpoint of it. But then at the same time, those of us who are in the community look at that and say like, well, you might be missing out on really huge parts of it if you don't actually believe in it, because you won't be having the same experiences as someone who goes into a situation with the belief that things are going to happen, and, you know, like, and being open to these things. So it could be a whole other discussion. But yeah, the only reason I have this book is because my partner picked it up and tried to start reading it thinking they would learn more about me, and they got stuck in the beginning because it was not really helpful. You kind of have to really get past that. So yeah, that. The next three, the last three books that I have, they all have a very similar theme, which is that they are all kind of, I think this is the case for the third one, I'm not entirely sure, as you'll see when I talk about it. I believe all three of these are kind of a Christian mystic, Christian spiritualist vibe. So first, we have a book that I had heard of many, many times, and an author or writer who, I don't know why I said or writer, authors are writers. Anyway, a name that I've heard many times and I've seen many quotes from, and I really like what I've seen of their little snippets of their writing. Heard of this book, found it at a secondhand shop, and decided to pick it up, and it turned out it's a signed copy. Interesting. So this is Care of the Soul, a guide for cultivating depth and sacredness in everyday life by Tamora. And yeah, I picked it up, and it happens to be signed, which is just interesting. So I haven't really started like reading through this at all. It's just, I picked it up because I know the title and I know the author name, and I was like, yes, I will read this eventually. So a lot of you may have actually read this before. Let me know if you have, or if you've read anything else by Tamora and what you think of it. The next one, again, kind of similar. I actually picked this one up after reading Dance of the Dissident Daughter by Sue Monk Kidd, which was definitely a divine feminine from a Christian standpoint of, you know, Christianity being very patriarchal, and depending on the denomination, women do not have a very large role or a lot of things that they are allowed or permitted to do within the religion. And so female Christians are often now exploring these goddess-centered paths and the divine feminine, and how did that get lost and how can that be reclaimed? So this is, I loved Dance of the Dissident Daughter, and this is in a similar vein, which is why I picked it up when I saw it at a secondhand shop. It is called Guidance from the Darkness, the Transforming Power of the Divine Feminine in Difficult Times, and it is by the Reverend Mary Murray Shelton. Not a title or an author that I had ever heard before. I just, from the title, it made me think that it's going to be kind of like Dance of the Dissident Daughter, again, from this feminine Christian melding place, and transformative power, difficult times. I was like, hell yeah, I'm going to read this. And I actually showed it to my mom, too, and said that might be something that she would like to look into. But yeah, so I've had this for a few years now, and I just haven't actually started it, but I'm looking forward to reading that. And then this last one is a book that, again, I think it's somewhat Christian-based. It might not actually be, but at least I know there's like a quote from the Bible in the beginning of it, so I don't know how Christian it is or not, but it's a title that I definitely heard before. It's a book that many people have told me to read before. It is a book that essentially, I've never heard anyone really talk about what it's about. I've only ever heard people say, you need to read it, to everyone ever. So when I found it for, you know, how, actually, I don't know, did I get this from my mom or did I find it at, I think my mom found it at a secondhand bookstore, and it was in her collection that she left here in this state with my grandma at my grandma's house when my mom moved. So maybe I just got it from that collection. I don't know. I don't remember how this book ended up in my life, but everyone ever has always just said read it. So, The Celestine Prophecy and Adventure by James Redfield. How many of you have read this book? I know a lot of people have. Let me know your thoughts. I definitely have been meaning to actually take this off my shelf and read it, which is why it's been on my top shelf of my kind of spirituality section and right on the end so that I can grab it, and it's right in a place where I remember to grab it, and the Perfection of Yoga was right next to it. So this, I think, was going to be the next thing I want to start. But now I don't know. I mean, I'm rereading By Oak, Ash, and Thorn right now. I don't know. I have so many books that I could read. But yeah, these are some of the ones that have been on my shelf for a long time that I've been meaning to read. It's kind of like the Christian-based ones, because I keep picking up my obviously very pagan and witchy books, and like all the new books that I want to get are witchy books. And rereading my magical fiction, Fairyland, Circle of Magic, everything else Tamora Pierce. Last year I finally read Peter S. Beagle's The Last Unicorn and Summerlong, which is his most recent novel. I had never read Peter S. Beagle before last year. And so, yeah. Those are some things that are on my shelf that I'm looking forward to reading. Let us know in the comments or in your own video response what might already be on your shelf that you're really looking forward to reading, that you've been meaning to read forever but just haven't gotten around to, because we all know that struggle. And Katey, in her video, said that she wasn't sure if this is a thing on YouTube, but now that two of us have done it, it's a thing. So thank you to whoever it was who suggested this to Katey. And then I just happened to see her video an hour after she uploaded it yesterday while I was trying to decide what to do for my video this weekend. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is perfect. So thank you to that person, and thank you to Katey, and thank you to all of you. If you are interested in learning any other places on the internet where I am, or supporting the kind of work that I do on YouTube, links are always in the description. And I don't always remember to say this in videos, so now that it popped into my head, I just want to mention my videos are supported and sponsored by my followers, sponsors, patrons on patreon.com/cutewitch772. So this video, like all of my other main channel videos, except for a select few that are not, are sponsored by some wonderful people who choose to support my work. And for $1 or more a month, you can support my work on Patreon and have access to some exclusive goodies and extra videos and things. I am currently in the process of redoing the rewards and the tiers. So right now, if you go, you'll see it says kind of under construction on most of the areas, because I am doing some work on them for 2019. But yeah, you can check out some of my latest videos, things that might be related here on the end screen. I always put those up. There might be a playlist to my book reviews or my bookshelf tour, something like that. Since you're watching this video, you like books. So there's those. You can subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.